Professor Smith, thank you so much for joining me today for this faculty highlight. I'm really excited to speak with you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate your invitation.
Of course. All right. Well, I think we can jump right into the questions. I think my first one would be maybe if you could just introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about what you do here at GW as a professor, and maybe your academic background and what you study and what you research.
Okay, sure, yeah. I teach in the university writing program. I teach first year writing, so UW 1020. I've been here since 2005, so I have taught a wide range of topics that are all kind of connected to my research areas of interest. So I study contemporary women's popular culture productions. So films, books, any kind of like media I'm interested in. And so I've done a class on writing about romantic comedies. I did one on violence in American culture. Right now, I'm teaching a communicating feminism, UW 1020. And then I'll also teach a identity politics of the kitchen, which is about food and identity. I taught it this past spring, and so I'm going to bring it back in the fall. And then I kind of had a long, winding road to where I ended up. I went to undergrad in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And then I went 2 hours down the road to the University of Delaware, where I thought I was going to get my museum studies degree, which I did end up getting. But while I was there, I had to be enrolled in a major program. So I just picked English because I love to read and I was an English major in undergrad. And then I got in the classroom and I just loved it. So I decided to stick around, get my PhD so that hopefully one day I could teach undergrads. And luckily, I am able to do that and do my research, which I really love doing as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. That's such a cool journey, that really cool road that you went down on. That's really awesome. And kind of talking a little bit about your kind of expertise in women's culture and popular culture. I know that back in 2007, you published a book, Cosmopolitan Culture and Consumerism in Chick Lit. And you kind of looked at novels that I think are often dismissed as like light or frivolous. And I was wondering what made you want to take those texts seriously? And maybe if you could
Mm.
talk a little bit about what they teach us about like gender and modern identity.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you did your research. Nicely done. Yeah, so when I was getting my PhD, I was really drawn. I really am interested in the novel, but I'm really interested in like women's novels and how they kind of take the novel and change it or update it or use it to express their own experiences. And you're absolutely right that lots of people think this is light reading or beach reading. I actually had somebody, we did mock interviews at Delaware. Maybe I shouldn't go on the record saying this, but I think it's okay. We did mock interviews, and one of the women that was chosen for my mock interview said, I hate to break it to you, but you're never going to get a job studying beach reading. Which I thought was very anti-feminist of her to say. So there was a lot of resistance to my project. But luckily, I found a really terrific advisor, Mariah Frawley, who is now at GW as well. So I kind of have followed her on her journey too. She was at the University of Delaware when I was there. And she studied the 19th century women's novel, so Jane Austen, Bronte. And, as we were talking about contemporary interpretation, she was like, there's a lot of returning to the 19th century novel. And so she said, let me be your shepherd through this process. And so she signed up as my advisor. And she was really encouraging about my work. And, I think a lot of times women's cultural productions, they get dismissed for numerous reasons. Certainly, if we think about those old divisions of high art and low art, right? Men being high art, women being low art. And then with a lot of the novels that I looked at, they were really funny, right? So we also have like drama being high art and comedy being low art. And so these women were kind of who were writing these funny novels about their experiences had these kinds of perceptions of them being not serious and what I was finding as I was reading more and more and more during my PhD was that there was actually really excellent commentary on, contemporary culture. And in particular, I was looking at the way in which these books were responding to women's advice manuals. So, what were movies telling women about love? What were self-help books telling women about relationships? And so I kind of went and kind of looked at the way in which they were interrogating that in really smart and interesting ways that I felt people weren't giving them credit for because they were kind of looking at the cover and dismissing it without, kind of diving in and seeing what they were really doing. So that's kind of where that project came from. Plus, it incorporates material culture, which is part of my museum studies background, so I could bring in texts other than novels. I looked at a lot of women's magazines and advertisements and that kind of thing. So it was really a terrific project to work on.
It's amazing. That's so cool. And I love that you looked at a lot of different sources and texts to kind of inform that research because I think sometimes it's easy to like just narrow down your view into a specific subset of like literature. And I feel like sometimes that can be a little bit limiting. So I think
Yeah,
that's really awesome.
yeah.
And I think to your point of looking at how maybe characters in these kinds of novels navigate their identity through things that we typically associate with like womanhood, like shopping and traveling and dating. I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit more about how that like cultural storytelling has shaped how we understand maybe womanhood today. Do you think it's kind of created
Mm.
like a multifaceted perspective on womanhood, or do you feel
Mm.
like it's mostly kind of reduced women into like a super like monolithic kind of person?
Yeah, yeah. So that's super interesting. And one of my other advisors who helped me with the project, she keeps saying you need to like do a revisit, like where are we now and how has it come about? And like those are the original chick lit or like some of those like resistant narratives still present, or are they, as you said, kind of being reductive? And I just worked with a student who graduated on she was doing a thesis in American Studies, and she was looking at the reboot of Sex and the City. And she and I had a lot of conversations about this, right? Like, when does the resistance just become acceptance and like repetitiveness? And so I don't think I have a very good answer for you, because I think it's a really tricky question. And I think some texts do a better job at kind of maintaining that than others. And I found as as I read, I tend to make a distinction between that early chicklet and some of the chicklet that's come out more recently because it seems to just be taking some of the surface level tropes and reproducing them without, kind of interrogating the some of the more problematic messaging. Yeah. Yeah, so I go
Yeah.
back and forth on that.
No, yeah, and I appreciate that answer because it is definitely tough to kind of like have a definitive answer to that question. Completely understand that. Um,
Mhm.
I'm wondering maybe how do you approach generally, maybe in the classroom or just within your research, writing about popular genres and like commercial fiction
Mhm.
academically? Because, like I mentioned in my first question, sometimes those genres don't really get taken seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. And I was thinking about how I'm so glad that, use the word limiting, right? Like I didn't limit myself in that chick lit book because I think it produced a more nuanced kind of understanding of the genre, but then also prepared me for all my students who want to write about TikToks, right? So like, how do we take these things that are seemingly light and fluffy and really interrogate them, right? And I had this student write a really brilliant paper on the fridge files that GW does. And, we kind of talked about one of the things we talk a lot about in class is if you want to write about something like this, there's no scholarship. Like, what do you do? How do you, engage with it? And so he did a really great job of, you know, um, bringing in what we call a lens and kind of thinking through what is a scholarship that connects with this text and how can I use it to interpret the text that I'm interested in. And so he found a lot of information on college and nutrition and problematic eating habits, and then took that and kind of applied it to what Fridge Files is saying about college students' eating habits. And so I think a lot of the work that I've done, I'm always interested in like really kind of contemporary stuff. And so sometimes there's not a lot of scholarship on tradwives, for instance, right? And so if I want to write about tradwives, I've got to figure out a way to kind of intellectualize that and bring in research and scholarship. And so I think in doing that in my own work, it's helped me in the classroom to say to people, okay, you want to write about the bear? Because I had another student who wanted to write about the television series The Bear, right? Well, maybe no one's written any scholarship on it in the way that they did with a Shakespeare text, but that doesn't mean that you can't turn this into some sort of research project or engage with it in an intellectual fashion. And I think that's what's so rewarding about my classes is that, students are used to, and I do the same thing. Like I was watching The Secret Lives of Mormon Housewives, right? Or The Secret Lives and kind of passively engaging with my entertainment and then kind of flipping that switch and saying, okay, but what am I really learning from this? What is this teaching me about feminism, about women, about sexuality, right? And so I think it's so fun when students like flip that switch and they start to see like, oh, wow. I love this romantic comedy, but what is it teaching me about love and marriage, right? Or race or sexuality or whatever. And those are some of the most rewarding moments in class. And then, of course, I have to tell students, like, you can hold two things in your heart at one time. Like, I can love the Real Housewives, but I can also understand how these are problematic female friendships, right? So we do a lot of that kind of discussion in class. And I think it's just fun and exciting for them.
That's awesome. I think that's great advice. Like you can hold two things in your heart at once.
Yeah.
And
I'll tell you
I,
do you want to hear where that phrase comes from?
yeah.
Well, so when my son is 14 now. When he was 4, he went to this outdoor preschool where they were very like in touch with their emotions. And that was one of the mantras of Miss Leslie. She's a teacher at the Purple School. She would say, you can hold two things in your heart at one time. And we often say that in class, and I often say it in my home. So I have to give a shout out to Miss Leslie for that.
Okay, shout out to her because that's awesome advice.
Yeah.
And I think that's also to your point about like finding maybe those common threads in non-academic texts to academic scholarship and things like that, and kind of realizing that there is something to be said about passively engaging with content that may not seem academic or purposeful,
Hmm.
when in reality it is. And I think I love The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. It's a great show, and I've definitely caught myself being like, oh, like what am I learning here?
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. And I think
Yeah.
maybe to that point of maybe going a little bit more into how you kind of engage with students in the classroom, I'm curious how you encourage them to balance maybe their personal voices and then also kind of maintaining the structure of an academic piece, especially when they're writing about maybe personal or cultural experiences.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question. That's something we spend time talking about because, in the texts that we read throughout the semester, we often find that the most engaging academic texts are the ones where that author can kind of bring a part of themselves into the essay, right? And so we try to model that, and kind of discuss like where those moments are appropriate or inappropriate, right? So if you're deep diving into a text, you might not use the first person to kind of analyze it. But, certainly the way in which this, your own personal experience might have sparked this project, I think can add a really interesting layer to like an intro or a conclusion, right? And we talk a lot about, finding subject matter that you can connect with and engage with, because anytime you can connect with something, you're going to produce a better piece of writing. And I think that's something that comes up in a lot of the presentations at our, university writing and research conference where students present their research projects. They often will say to the students gathered there, right, that I picked something that I was like invested in so that that investment can kind of come through, whether it's directly in an intro and a story that they tell in the intro, or just in the like level of passion and engagement and investment you can see in the project. So I think it's important for them to find something that they can connect with and explore and just, so the whole experience is more meaningful. I never want my students to feel like they came to my class and everything that they did in my class stayed in my class and they never used it again, right? So we spend a lot of time kind of thinking through, well, what are you doing in your other classes and how does that connect to what you're doing here? And is there a way that you can bring that knowledge into the project that you're working on? So I had a student actually writing on tradwives last semester, and she was taking a class, a history class in the politics of the 60s. And so a lot of the stuff that she was reading there about the historical moment, she was able to apply to what she was doing with her tradwives project. And it was something she was interested in and invested in. And it just, produces stronger writing, I think, and more engaged writing too.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder to give to your students that, the topics that they're personally invested in are worthy of, talking about, of sharing in the classroom, of sharing in academic spaces.
Mhm.
So I think that's awesome. And I think that leads me into maybe some of less academic oriented questions and maybe some more personal questions. I'm curious, maybe in the classroom, if there's a novel or cultural figure that you come back to a lot, whether it's in the classroom or maybe on your own, or in your own research.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Is there something in particular, like a novel or a figure? I mean, of late, especially with any class that engages with feminism, there's a lot of talk of Taylor Swift and issues of feminism. And we do an essay about Taylor Swift's feminism and Beyonce's feminism. Um, Trying to think who else we kind of engage with consistently. I feel like Legally Blonde comes up a lot too. That's one I use regardless of my topic. Okay, I'm gonna go with Legally Blonde. Because what I do with that film is I only show the first like 2 or 3 minutes of it, and we do an activity on passive versus active engagement. So I show it to them one time, and they all kind of sit back and they're like bopping their heads to the music, right? And then we start to interrogate, like, what are we learning about who is on this college campus, right? Who do we see? Who do we not see? What kind of activities are they engaged with? And so that's a clip I think that's really startling to them, especially because they're in college and they start to notice, oh, wow, this campus is really white, right? And nobody's studying, and they're all in fraternities and sororities, and there's a lot of heteronormativity, right? And so I think that's something that I return to time and time again to kind of drive home that idea about passive versus active consumption. Yeah, I'll go Legally Blonde.
Okay, I love that. That's one of my favorite movies. So I love that you keep that in the classroom.
It's a good one.
Um,
And you have to hold two things in your heart at one time, right? Because
yeah.
when I point out to them that like everybody on the campus is white, and that's like what message is that sending to students of color who might want, right? And then they're like, oh my God, no, why did you ruin this? But then I say, well, you could still love it, right? But you also
Yeah.
should be aware of this messaging.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Shout out to Miss Leslie again for that reminder. Um, I think maybe I think I have just two more questions before we wrap up here. What's something students might be surprised to learn about you, like maybe a hobby or an activity that you do outside of the classroom, if you want to share?
Yeah, I don't think they'd be surprised to learn this, only because I talk about them obsessively, but I do have two dogs. Yes, Hallie and Pippin. I'm a huge dog lover. If I could bring my dogs to class, I would, but one is very antisocial and one is very social. So, and they can't be separated. So I can't take the social one to school because the antisocial one will get depressed. And she's already on medication because she has some issues with anxiety and depression. So they're very high maintenance dogs. My students hear about them a lot. But yeah, I'm really into animals. I never had a dog when I was little, even though I would ask every year at Christmas, could I have a dog? And then my parents put a stuffed dog under the tree every year. It was never the same. So as soon as I graduated, I got my first dog, which was a little Westie named Ruby, and she lived with me for 16 years. I have a great picture of her and me. I'm in my wedding dress, and she's next to me. So she tolerated my husband, and then when I had my son, she tolerated my son, but she really just preferred if it was her and me. So, but now we have these two dogs that are much more family friendly. They like everybody equally in the house. So my son appreciates that because I think he always felt a little on the outside with Ruby. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. I also constantly wished for a dog for Christmas, and my parents didn't even bother to put a stuffed one under the Christmas tree. It was just not happening.
Right.
But
But
I think
see, dreams can come true. I got my little
yeah,
Ruby, so.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, and then I think maybe my final question for today is, and this might be a little difficult one, if you could assign just one essay, book, or piece of media to every college student, what would it be and
Mm.
why?
Okay, so the last several semesters since coming back from COVID, I have taught in my class a chapter from Bell Hooks's book, Engage, I think it's called Engaged Pedagogy or Teaching to Transgress. I can't remember what the chapter is versus the title of the book. But the chapter that I assign is about kind of about passive and active academic consumption, right? And how the classroom is a place of transformation. It's supposed to be a place of joy, a place of excitement. And, I really felt with that time we spent online with COVID, right, that people returned to the classroom with a lot of hesitancy and anxiety and just like trauma from COVID and then like relearning like how to be a student. And this essay is just so lovely because I think it reminds students that this is not supposed to be drudgery, right? And I tell them that. I'm like, I don't want to come in here and like feel like sad or like I don't know. I don't want to feel angry about my job. Like, I want to come in and I want to explore interesting ideas with you. I want to hear from you. I want us to be a community. And that essay does a really good job, I think, of setting the tone for my classroom. And I think their educational experience overall, just like making the most of this like wonderful time that you have to just think and write and read and research. Um, so I would say that that would be something I think would be meaningful for any college student, regardless of major. Just that kind of inspirational attitude towards education.
I think that's an amazing recommendation. I'll definitely have to check it out.
Yes, good one.
Um, Well, I think that's all the questions I have today. And I just wanted to thank you so much for coming here today and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And I really hope this serves as an opportunity for the GW community to get to know you and your work just a little bit better. So thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.